We are live. Welcome to this live webinar with Rabbi Pinchas Winston entitled Trust and Faith When We Need It Most. I'm not going to go through the whole long introduction. Those that have not been here before, welcome to see our past broadcasts in order to get more information. This webinar is being sponsored, though, by bringthemhome.org.il and the Miriam Geula Project. If you want more information about Rabbi Winston and his materials and many of his books, you can go to his website, which is at 36.org. And with that, I will hand it over to the rabbi.
Okay, thank you. I just want to finish off what I began last week. I mentioned there were 4 things we need to understand about Jewish history to put things in perspective, because as much as we like things to be straightforward and black and white, that's not Jewish history. Jewish history has many times been convoluted and is convoluted very often. It's very complex, a lot of things going on, and very far from straightforward. I mentioned 3 concepts last week, which I'm not going to go into again right now. You can look at last week's program, or you can write me. I'll be happy to mention them again. Much of the material I'm going to use this evening is based upon a sefer called the Drusha Motolim by the Leshem Shabbat V'Achlama, Rav Shlomo Elyashiv, the grandfather of the past Gadol Hador, who died about 10 years ago at this point in time, and he's basing himself on Pankamoris, various different things. I did translate some of this material and explained and annotated it in a book called In Search of Trust, which you can see. It's available through Amazon.com, In Search of Trust. So the 4th concept I did not get a chance to mention last week is actually called alilus. Alilus means a pretext. The term, for example, for blood libel is alilus dam, which where those who were making the blood libel would seek a pretext. They really wanted just to do something bad to the Jews, and it was anti-Semitism through and through, but they for some reason required a pretext, and they made up stories like baking matzahs with the blood of Gentile children, etc., etc. Russia was very big on blood libels, and even Eastern Europe too, for that matter. So the idea of alilus is the idea of a pretext where things seem set to happen in history, and there's not much we can do about it. It's all part of a master plan. As much as things can appear chaotic, as they do today, and out of control, and the wrong people seem to have power, and bad people are getting away with all kinds of terrible things, and a lot of money is going to the wrong people who are using it for the wrong things, and God never loses control. And the Medrash in Tanchuma brings down 2 basic examples for this idea of alilus, and that is a conversation between Adam Harishon and God himself, the first man, right, on the first day of creation, seemingly perhaps before Chava was even created, which happened the same day also. And he says to God, he learned Torah. Adam he's aware of Torah. Certainly, he was created on extremely high spiritual levels. So he was one with Torah. So he knew what was inside Torah, certainly conceptually, and what the mitzvahs were going to be eventually. And he says to God that, you're saying that if I eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that I will surely die. I will introduce death into the world. But let me ask you a question. When was the angel of death actually created? Yom Sheni, the 2nd day of creation. That's the angel of death, the one who actually, causes people to die. And when was I created? On day 6, long after the Malach HaMavis, the angel of death, was created. If you didn't intend for death to come into the world, then why make this whole story about me being the one who might bring death into the world? And second of all, he says, how long was Torah with you before you even made the world? So uses the language of 2,000 years, but it just means a very long time. Torah is the blueprint for creation. It existed long before creation even existed, just like any blueprint. It comes before the actual construction of the building, even though it was not handed over to the Jewish people until 24:48, but as Rashi points out, Noach learned Torah, Abraham figured out the Torah by looking at creation. So the Torah was in the world for a long time. It was formally and officially given to the Jewish people in 24:48, 1313 BCE, because that's when we officially became a Torah nation. But it was there for a long time before. And Adam says to God, he says, look at Parshas Chukas. Parshas Chukas we saw not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago. And it begins talking about the laws of dead people. Meaning that it says that if a person is in a tent where there's a dead body, they become spiritually defiled, and also perhaps some of the vessels inside there. So Adam says to God, he says, if you didn't mean for death to come into the world, so why do you have all these halachas already built into the Torah before death came into the world? Talking about death. Clearly, you mean for death to come into the world. I'm just the fall guy. You're just pinning the blame on me. But the truth is, it's a medrash, and did the conversation actually take place? Maybe yes, maybe no. And there's answers for Adam Rishon, because after all, the Torah is prophecy. And negative prophecies don't have to come true, but this one did. There's other answers, but the medrash is making a point. Medrash is making a very important point. And it brings an example. It says, what is this like? What is this thing similar to? It's similar to a man who decides he wants to divorce his wife, but he doesn't want to do it just straight out. He's looking for a pretext. So what does he do? He writes the get before he comes home. This is the medrash that they're talking. He writes the get before he comes home, puts it in his pocket or his hand, whatever, comes home, and comes into the house and says hello to his wife, and says to his wife, would you mind making me a cup of tea? So she immediately goes and she makes a cup of tea for him, and as she passes the cup of tea to him, he passes her get. And she says, what's this? And he says, this is your get. We're getting divorced. I want you out of the house. And she says, what did I do wrong? And he says to her, you made me a warm cup of tea. Okay, a little bit of a weak excuse for divorce, but that's what he says. But she's smart. And she says back to him, she says, you're such a Navi, such a prophet, that you knew I'd make you a warm cup of tea and you'd want to divorce me. You came home with the get already in your hand? That's not what's going on over here. You meant to divorce me, and this was just a pretext. So the Madrash says further, it says, the whole story of Yaakov and Yosef, how Yaakov loved Yosef more, and because of that, the brothers became jealous of him, and once they became jealous of him, so then they sold him down to Mitzrayim, and all the bad history that happened because of that. Well, the Gemara says, based upon this particular story, that we learn from this that a father should not treat, a parent, not just a father, but a parent should not treat one child more special than others, because it creates jealousy. Because the $2 of clothing that Yaakov favored, Yosef with over his brothers, they became jealous and sold him down to Mitzrayim. And as a result of that, all of us are all his brothers and sisters-in-laws and brothers-in-law, whatever it is, they all had to go down to Mitzrayim in the end because of this act of jealousy. Now, Yaakov Avinu was called the Bechir of the Avos, the chosen one of the Avos. He was a prophet par excellence. He was somebody who spoke to God. He was wise beyond the comprehension. And yet, he didn't know this basic rule of parenting. Because why? ArtScroll hadn't published books yet on the topic. It took thousands of years to figure this very simple point out. No, Yaakov knew all of this. So the Madrash says this is called a Lilus, because really Yaakov would not have done that. He wouldn't have favored him over, not any overt way, and then caused jealousy, but Hashem made it happen. Hashem put into Yaakov to favor Yosef so that the brothers would become jealous and sell him into slavery, so that the prophecy given to Avraham Avinu in the Brisbane and Basarim of being a stranger in the land not our own could be fulfilled. Okay, these all require deeper explanations to understand history, but it's just another example based upon what we spoke about last week. The Jewish history is not simple, it's not straightforward. The only thing that we can say with any certainty, and that is God runs it all. He never stops paying attention. He never loses control, no matter how chaotic and how deadly, how difficult the situation can become. He's always in control. But we have to know, based upon what we spoke about last week and we spoke about this week, that the fact that we can't understand everything and put it into perspective and see it as coming from God is our limitation, not God's, not history's. This is not the end of the discussion. There's a lot more to go into it, but it's just important to have these things in mind, especially as we go into increasingly more chaotic period of history, and one that seems to be quite antithetical to Torah, the Torah way of life. The best way to deal with it, the best way to deal with anything for that matter, and really is the purpose of creation. The reason why we're here, the reason we learn Torah, and the reason we perform mitzvahs is because of the trait of bitachon and emunah. Really, two sides of the same coin. What's the difference between bitachon and emunah? So the simplest way to explain it, there's a lot of discussion. Some people say there's no difference at all, but they really are different in as much as emunah tends to go on the past. And bitachon, like emunah means faith, right? It's faith. And bitachon is a projection of that faith into the future. So, a classic example of this idea is, let's say, for example, you want to take your best Shabbos suit to the cleaners, and a brand new cleaners just opened up in the city. It looks like a nice store, they look professional, but you don't know the quality of the dry cleaning. And you don't have a lot of suits. Are you going to take your suit there the first time? This expensive suit, your designer's suit that you wear only on Shabbos and Yom Tov and special occasions. You might, but chances are you won't. You might start off with something you can afford to lose. You might start with something you don't mind if it doesn't come back perfect. But after a while, if it turns out that after a few months or years maybe of using the same dry cleaners and seeing that each time you get back your clothing that you're pleased with the results, so then you begin to rely on this person. You stop second guessing him. You stop thinking twice about it, and you start bringing in your more expensive clothing because the person seems to be professional. An uman, like the word emunah, like the word amen, is a professional. He's an expert, right? So Hashem said in Parshas Ve'eschanan, Atah ha'reised ladas, you have been shown to know, to understand, to see. Listen, I'm God. I can simply command you and tell you must trust in me. You must believe me. If you don't, poof, you're God. I can do that. I'm God. I can do whatever I want. I'm the master of the universe. He doesn't do that, though. He understands who we are. He made us. He's the manufacturer. And he says to us, I've shown you that you can see for yourself. I took you out of Mitzrayim with fantastic miracles. I brought you to the sea and then split that for you and drowned the Mitzrayim with fantastic miracles. And then you had no food because the matzah ran out. And I showered down man from Shemayim, miracle after miracle, Anei Kavod, clouds of glory, flattening the desert, getting rid of all the deadly vermin along the way. Miracle after miracle, the Be'er, Miriam, the mystical, miraculous well that followed the Jewish people around all through the 40s in the desert, providing all their watering needs. So I prove myself. I'm reliable. If I make a promise, I keep it. And even without the promise, I have your back all the time. Now, what does that mean? Well, you can argue with the past. The past is the past. What about the future? So when you bring your clothing to the dry cleaners the next time, you don't know how it's going to come out. Maybe this is the one time it won't work. Maybe this is the one day he won't be there, and a system will do it and ruin everything. All kinds of possibilities. But you don't worry about that. Why? Because he's an expert. So you project the emunah from the past into the future to say, just like he's done a good job with my clothing for the last 5 years, and I can rely upon him, likewise do I rely upon him to take care of my clothing this time too. Just as Hashem saved us from the Mitzrayim and did fantastic miracles for us in the Midbar, right? And all through history, we've seen fantastic miracles. The very fact that we're here today, as a nation against all the odds, as even Mark Twain himself pointed out in Harper's Magazine in 1900 something, right? And we got back the land just like it was promised, and we had Kibbutz Galius just like it was promised. Everything, we have to trust him for the future too. That's bitachon. Bitachon is the projection, and it works the same thing in relationships too, because when you first meet somebody who might potentially be your spouse, you can't trust them. You don't even know them at that point. They might be nice and look reliable, but until they've proven themselves year after year after year, you're not going to just simply rely upon them for things that matter so much to you. But after a while, if people prove reliable, then you don't even think twice about relying upon one another for things that you have to get done, because that's the projection of the emunah from the past. So we have to have emunah in Hashem. That means taking the time to look at all the miracles Hashem has done for us. Now, I knew somebody, or know somebody, who was once worrying about his Makola bill, how he's going to pay his bill at the Makola. Makola is like our local grocery store here. It's called a Makola. And, he lived from month to month. And he was worried. He couldn't see how he was going to be able to pay the bill this month. So I asked him, I said, how'd you pay up until now? So he says, last month it was a miracle, the most amazing thing. I had the same question. But you know what happened? At the last second, my parents helped us out. They expected birthday money, whatever. It was enough to cover more or less the balance, and we got off the hook. And what about the month before that? Even bigger miracle. There was a check that came in from the government, wasn't expecting it, didn't know what was happening, and it came in just literally at the right time. And the month before that, that one we had this, and it goes back like 10, 12 years, month after month after miracle, So I said to him, I said, I don't understand. What is your question? You've had like how many years of month after month after month, a miracle taking place? God is, do you admit that was Hashem doing it? 100%. Everything is from Hashem. It's all God. You understand that God was the one who paid you the money you required through the person, whoever gave you the check? 100%. Of course it is Hashem. So what are you worried about this month for? He said, listen, I can't argue in the past. What was. I worried each time, but Hashem came through. But what if this was the last month? What if last month was the last month? What if God says, look, I've been carrying you up until now for the longest time, month after month after month. I'm sick and tired of this. Go get a job already. Find your own source of money or a way I can give it to you without miracles each time. And this month I'm on my own. That's a problem with bitachon. There's no logic to that. A person can argue the logic all they want, but it's just it's a fear. So then you ask the person and you say to them, so I understand. So what is this? What are you really afraid of? Is God incapable of doing the miracle you require? Chas v'chalila. God is God. Rabbanu Shalom, the master of the universe. He can do whatever he wants, in whatever way he wants, whenever he wants. He's God. Okay, so there's no problem in that department. You're clear about that, 100%. Okay, good. So then, where's the hitch? Where's the obstacle over here? Who says I'm worthy? Who says I'm worthy of the miracle? It's not that God can't do it. It's not that God hasn't done it. I wasn't worthy any of the times for those miracles. I don't even know why God did do that for me the entire time. But I don't have the proper zchuyot, the proper merit to have that miracle to keep happening. And maybe I'll do something that will anger God, and he'll drop me short. So the Leshem explains that this was in fact the problem with the Jewish people in the Midbar, in the desert. The Pasuk faults them. It says in Tehillim, right? David HaMelech writes, they didn't believe in his wonders. Right? It says, they didn't believe in Elohim and Hashem. It's very important why David chose this particular name of Hashem as opposed to Yud Kei Vav Kei. It says Elohim, and they didn't believe in his redemption. Now, what are we talking about over here? This is very important, because are we saying that the Jewish people rewrote history? They got to the Midbar and someone said, Did anyone see how we left Mitzrayim? Right? I don't know. We just sort of like left. Did anyone see the 10 plagues? No 10 plagues. Or, 10 plagues, but it all happened b'derech teva. There's a hieroglyphic that, like something 248 or something like that. Velikovsky brings the Age of Chaos in the book, is apparently well known too. And it was written by an Egyptian that describes 10 events that occurred one after the other that destroyed Egypt, including the river turning to a silty red. Now, this could have been written by somebody in a very distant part of Egypt. The Jews were not all over the place, and there was no news in those days, or false news for that matter. Actually, there was false news. They tend to lie about history too back then. But and Egyptians were watching this happen, and they were looking for explanations. So they turned to the magicians of their time, and they came up with all kinds of natural explanations. Some people will agree the sea may have split, but they looked for natural explanations. And maybe I once saw one explanation that all the planets lined up in the solar system and created a tremendous gravitational force that caused the waters to kind of like flatten out. It wasn't exactly lanes and all that, but because people don't want to involve God in the process. So this is what the Jews in the desert were doing? What do you mean below? For self. They for sure believed. They saw it on the back, right? It is the past. But it's a two-part process. Belief is a two-part process. Imagine, talking to a very close friend, right? And the person says to you, you can rely upon me. I'll watch that money for you. No, it's okay. Well, you don't trust me? Of course I trust you. Have I ever steered you wrong in the past? Of course you haven't. Have I ever let you down? No, never. I've always come through for you, right? Absolutely. So give me the money and I'll watch it for you, while you go do your thing. That's okay. Do you believe in me or don't you believe in me? I do. I really trust you. So then So it reflects back on the past as well. If you can't project that into the future, then it means that you've got a problem within the past as well. So David HaMelech is saying, and he uses the name Elohim, because Elohim is the name of God that works basically b'derech teva, through nature. So the way that the Jewish people failed to project the miracles of what happened in Mitzrayim into the midbar, into the desert, was an indication that they didn't fully appreciate what had already happened for them. And why? Because if they had they would have said, "What me worry? What do I care? God has come through. He will come through again." So the Leshem says over here, I'm going to read a bit and translate as I go along because I think it's worthwhile seeing in the words itself. He says over here that they made two basic mistakes or important mistakes that led to their downfall in the midbar, and eventually, of course, the spies, and then being stuck in the desert and dying off in the desert. So he says the first mistake he made is based upon a Gemara in the tractate of Avodah Zarah, dealing with the laws of idol worship. But the Gemara there says that God does not deal with his creations but Petrunia. He does not play games with his creations. What does that mean? It means that if a person finds himself in a situation of test, they're in a situation where they have a choice to trust in Hashem or not trust in Hashem. Now, let's distinguish. If the person put themselves into a situation of danger by choice, they could have gone a different path. They could have made a different decision. They could have done things earlier and not put the pressure on themselves to have to take the shortcut, which happens to go to one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in town. They could have done that, but they were negligent. They didn't care enough. They didn't think about everything in advance. So now you're probably on your own. Then God says, listen, now you're relying upon miracles, and that you shouldn't do. You're not allowed to rely upon miracles as an individual, okay? But the person's doing everything they can to do the right thing, to serve Hashem properly, based upon their own koyches and their own talents and whatever's available to them. Then they find themselves in a situation of difficulty where they could either trust in Hashem or panic and worry. They have to know that they can survive this test. This is what the Gemara means, that Hashem does not play tricks on his creations. He's not could have set you up in such a situation where you will, face danger and not be able to survive. Yes, there are a few exceptions, which we'll get to later on, because we know that Jewish history has been fraught with danger, and even people who had the bitachon ended up dying anyhow, like Rabbi Kiva, for example, who was a big Baal bitachon, and yet he was killed by the Romans. The Leshem will address that later on, B'ezras Hashem. I don't have time to do it today, but he'll get to it later on. Also, what about things like the Holocaust? We'll get to that as well. There's a reason for that too. But in everyday basic life, be short of what we call a Gezar Din, a divine decree, where the world just seems to fall apart or fall on top of the Jewish people, short of that, the rule is that God will never put you into a situation of test, of trust in Him, if you can't pass that test. How will I pass the test? I can't see what the solution is. I don't know how things will turn out. Well, anyhow, we've seen how many times we have panicked in situations only to find out that the panic was not justified. Something happened to save the day. Things didn't, pan out the way we worried they would pan out in the end. In the beginning, it looked frightening. The brain plays many tricks on us. We have fears going back to our childhood. The news can distort realities and cause fear and panic. It happens all the time. But a person has to be a Baal Seichel. A person has to use their mind over what they feel. They have to be clued in to the fact that there's a higher level of thought here, higher level of reality. And if a person can reach this madrega, this level, they can rise above what's going on around them. And that itself, we'll see, becomes the salvation for the person. That's the first point that Leshem makes. The second point, which I'll read right now inside, is based upon the Medrash. He says, "Vashkia shenis hinei hayas v'rasam be'inyan bitachon." The second mistake that the Jewish people in the Midbar, those who left Mitzrayim, that they made, that caused them to falter all the time in the desert and fail their tests, was their understanding of the trait of bitachon itself, how it works. Ki ha'emesi she'ein davar omed neged habitachon. This statement, the person memorized these words alone and was able to get themselves to live according to them, you're in a whole different world. A whole different world. It's aside from the fact that you'll be much more relaxed in life, miracles will happen for you. This one sentence here is the key to being able to evoke miracles, as we see great rabbis of the Second Temple era was able to do. You open the Gemara in Tainus in different places, in Brochus, for example, where there's constant stories of Tanaim, great rabbis who were constantly performing, miracles, faith healing and things like that, but using Kabbalah instead. And he says, this is the key right here. Nothing stands in the way of bitachon, of trust in God. What does that mean? It means that if a person trusts in God, they will get what they need. That's what he's saying. Now you can either buy it or not buy it, but that's what the words mean. And he's not doing this on his own. It's based on what the Medrash says. The Medrash says in Medrash Tehillim, Mizmor Lamed Beis, right? That's the Medrash on Tehillim itself, because Tehillim itself has its own Midrashim. It says, "V'botech b'Shem chesed yibenu." The pasuk itself says, somebody who trusts in God, kindness will envelop them, will surround them, meaning that God will do good things for them. And then now the Medrash comes in. Afilu Russia. Russia, they're not talking about the country. A Russia here means an evil person, somebody who's not living by Torah, not living by mitzvah, someone who's angering God for the most part. That's what a Russia does. Asa is called a Russia. Haman was called a Russia, right? But if a Russia, he says, the Medrash says, Habotech b'Shem chesed shebenahu. Even the Medrash is saying that even a Russia, if he could trust in the Kodesh Baruch Hu, he had bitachon in Kodesh Baruch Hu, good things will happen for him. What good things will happen for him? He'll be more successful at stealing, more successful getting away from the police, whatever, Doesn't mean it's right. He's not going to get punished for the averas. The sins are the sins. He's doing the wrong thing. But Yeshua's will happen for him. There's obviously, this is more of a theoretical things like the Gemara often will do, is to understand the extent to which a point will go, will push the envelope of an idea, but the Medrash is saying what the Medrash is saying. So how much more so if a Rasha trusts in Hashem that good things will happen for him and Yeshuas will take place, how much more somebody who's trying to be a tzaddik, even just a Benoni, but certainly not a Rasha, if they trust in Hashem. So it goes on to say, Vamusham, it says, furthermore, it says, Rabbi Mechadim la Rasha. Many are the pains and the suffering of the evil person. Why? The fisha enotola bitchono b'kodesh baruch Hu, because he simply doesn't trust in Hashem. Rabotech b'shem afil Rasha, as the Medrash says, a person that trusts in the Kodesh Baruch Hu, even a Rasha, good things happen for him. And he doesn't believe in that. I mean, obviously, it's kind of what we call stira. Usually somebody who's a Rasha is a Rasha because they don't trust in Hashem. The reason why we steal, if we steal, the reason why we cheat or lie, if we do these things to protect ourselves, as opposed to for a higher reason, higher cause, is because we don't believe Hashem is going to protect us. We look out for ourselves. So it's a lack of bitachon. A person stealing is a Rasha, is because of the fact he doesn't trust in Hashem. So, but the example is the example. So it says, Ayin Shem, look over there. V'chein amar Ramban. Likewise, the Ramban, Nachmanides, one of the very important big Rishonim going back to the 1200s, now wrote a very important sefer on the topic of bitachon, called Emunah v'bitachon, faith and trust. Very famous, well learned, not so easy to learn necessarily, but extremely important. Perik Aleph, he says over there, the pasuk in Tehillim says that you should trust in Hashem and do good. That's what it says, right? Trust in Hashem and do good. But it doesn't say the other way around. We would expect the verse to say, do good, and then trust in Hashem, just like the Chavos Lavava says, a classic work also in the time of the Rishonim, where he seems to indicate that bitachon is only a trait that works for tzaddikim, for righteous people. Because if you're righteous, you're living by Torah, you're doing all the mitzvahs properly, and you trust in Hashem, that's fine. But if you're stomach Jew, you're doing mitzvahs, you're learning, you're doing what more or less what you have to do, but you're not really a tzaddik per se. You're living a very average, Torah life or less. So according to the Chavos Lavavas, it seems that it's not going to work for you. To rely on the you have to do it anyhow. But to get the results you want, you have to be kind of a tzaddik for things like that. But this, according to the Ramban, is just the opposite. The Ramban seems to be saying, not saying, but he is saying exactly this. He says, why? This is very huge chiddush. It's a novel idea. It's a groundbreaking idea because it's counterintuitive. We expect miracles maybe if we have done something very, very positive. God, I gave a lot of tzedakah last week. The least you could do is make me successful in the stock market. I go to shul 3 times a day. The least you could do is protect me from being hit by a fender bender or something. Hashem, I do my best not to speak lashon hara. My teeth have to pay thousands of dollars now to have my teeth root canal, and what's the cheshbon over here? We always start off with that. We always come to God first and say, I have done X, Y, and Z. Now give me the results. We almost never come to Hashem and say, something? I don't deserve anything. I'm completely unworthy. And if it was up to me, I would simply take me and dump me someplace. But you are God, and you're all merciful. So, in spite of the fact that I have no merits, would you mind maybe just this one time, putting yourself out a bit and making this work for me? No, we first admit that you have to earn things. You have to deserve it. It's like going to your boss and asking for a raise after not putting the work in. You come to the boss after he knows that you have worked hard this year, because everything is bought and sold. You have to earn the schus. So we would do the same thing as well. We think that before God is going to perform a miracle for us, that it's going to have to be that we are somehow worthy on some level. And the Ramban saying, no, it doesn't work that way. You don't have to have the schuyot of other mitzvahs. He says, El batach b'Shem Bein shetiyeh tzadik, bein shetiyeh rasha, batach b'Hashem. Whether you're a righteous person or you're not a righteous person, you trust in Hashem. Now, you could just be saying, well, I'm not telling you you're going to get the results. I'm just telling you have to trust in Hashem. That's the mitzvah for everybody. It doesn't make a difference who you are. Well, of course that's the case. That's not. You don't need the Ramban to tell you that. He's telling you that if you do, it's something unto itself. But the pasuk does say after that you should do good. Right? Because let's face it. A person says, I've got this whole long list of averas, sins I've been doing the entire year since last Yom Kippur. I tried to fix up some I did. It's like, I don't even know where to begin half the time. But I have this crisis right now. I might lose my business, or I might lose my spouse, or God forbid, I might someone's in the hospital, they're sick. God, I don't feel worthy of asking you for something. But in spite of all that, would you mind helping me out? And God does. The miracle happens. A person shouldn't make the mistake of thinking that, if God was happy enough with me to have done this miracle and saved me, maybe he's overlooked all my sins and averas in the past, and I'm starting from square one. I'm okay. I'm good with God. No, it says in Ramban. The pasuk says, Batach B'Hashem means you can trust in God already before you've done the tshuva. But make sure you do the tshuva after. Because if you don't, you get punished for that. And that won't be an issue at Bituchon Emunah. You imagine a scenario where a guy, he's not, he doesn't do the right thing. He makes a lot of mistakes and doesn't care enough to serve Hashem the proper way. But he gets into a situation where if he doesn't get the money in time, or there's being chased by a bunch of gangsters who want to kill him, and he's praying to Hashem, please, 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 please save me. And Hashem does. Thing happens, he gets the money, gets saved, whatever, but he gets saved in the process. But he still has all these averas. He's walking away, thinking himself, wow, right? Me and Hashem, he saved my life. I'm okay. But because he doesn't do tshuva, he gets hit by a truck 15 minutes later as his punishment for not doing tshuva. So it's like, there's two things here. One of them is, you have averas, you have to do tshuva, always. You have to turn to Kodesh Baruch Hu and do the proper tshuva, regardless of the situation. Good, bad, doesn't make a difference. But there's a separate thing, a trait unto itself, kal bitachon. And when you have it, and when you use it, it will work for you if you're real with it and you're sincere with it, even before you have a chance to fix yourself up. It's a phenomenal concept. It's not something that most people know or aware of or rely upon, but the words that you have to remember is Ein Davar Omed Bifnei Bitachon. Now, that alone should be inspiration to develop the trait. And you have to know two things. Number one is bitachon is like a muscle. A muscle is something you can't simply stress out more than its capacity without preparing it. If a person decides they want to be able to lift 200 pounds in a gym, over their head, they can't simply walk in the first day and do it. They won't even be successful, but more than likely they'll hurt themselves in the process. You have to build it up. You have to build up the muscles, and maybe require a change of diet, even eating, raw eggs to more protein. And all of this is part of the package. And you work it a day after day, and it may be a couple of years before you get to the point where you can actually lift up 200 pounds above your head. So bitachon is the exact same thing. It is not something you can turn on at a moment's notice. It's a trait unto itself, but more than that, it's a mentality. It's a way of looking at life. It's something that has to be inculcated from a young age, but unfortunately it's not. And our biggest blessing has also been basically our biggest curse. Because, 100 years ago and 200 years ago and even further, Jews had nothing. They lived from day to day, literally, in terms of food and starvation, in terms of protection from the enemy and anti-Semitism. They did not know if they would be here tomorrow. They married off their kids younger because they weren't sure if there'd be a dowry by the time they got to the age of 18. Because that was life. You had to have bitachon and emunah in those days, or you simply lived in terror from day to day to day. We were blessed post-World War II, Baruch Hashem, both as a function of history and of technology, that our lives, the affluence increased and the influence also increased, and we gained access to all kinds of commodities and materialism. Even the idea of a credit card is a phenomenal thing to have created, because 100 years ago there wasn't such a thing. I mean, you go to the bank, borrow money if you had good credit, but the idea of having no money in your wallet, but having a couple of credit cards where you walk into the store and you buy food on credit, but hoping by the time that the bill comes around you can pay it, and even then you can pay it off in installments, has basically made it almost irrelevant to have bitachon. We're so pragmatic today that bitachon amunah becomes almost not pragmatic. So, it's been a fantastic blessing, and it's been tremendous in terms of our lifestyle and our comfort level, 100%. But as the Gemara says, it's very hard to eat at both tables at the same time. Meaning that if you belong to the material world, more than likely your spiritual world is going to suffer at the same time. The Gemara, the Mishnah, it's not my opinion. You can read them for yourself. Pirkei Avos talks about how we're supposed to live. All the Hasidic Rishonim and all the Musar Sforim and all, one after the other. Chovos Levavos, classic case in point. They tell you how we're supposed to live, not because as an ascetic, not because we're trying to be like the monks living off in the mountains, but we're trying to be Baalei Bitachon. That's the whole goal. The spies missed out on this point. People run away from Eretz Yisrael because they're afraid of it. Because why? Because you have to be Botech and Hashem. You have to trust in God to survive here. I mean, even here we have, Baruch Hashem, a lot of success and materialism, but we live in the lion's den. We're surrounded by over 1 billion enemies who do nothing but plan our demise for the most part. They're not being distracted by other things. And we live in a hostile world that puts pressure on us to acquiesce to our enemies. And it's a country of hard land and mountains that doesn't have like fertile soil like you do in some parts of the United States or Canada. And the rains might come, they might not. For years the Kinneret was low, and we had to watch the water usage for a period of time. And God says, this is the land that I watch over from year to year, from moment to moment, day to day. And I decide when the rains are going to come or not. So this is Eretz Bitachon. This is the land where you have to have that trust in God, the relationship, which is everything. Because the whole reason why Hashem made creation itself in the first place, and then eventually the Jewish people as a nation, is for that relationship. We're here for that. Torah and mitzvahs, yes, they are all important and all inclusive, and there are tickets to the world to come, but they're really just the means to the end. They're the things that we use to draw out our self-sacrifice for the sake of God, for putting ourselves in the line, for being Botech and Hashem. That's the goal, to trust in the God. That trust defines a relationship, any relationship, a business partnership, a spousal relationship, parent to child relationship, and especially man to God relationship. The level of trust that a person has in the objects or the other side of that relationship defines the depth of the relationship, how close people actually are. And we know it's not something that just develops overnight. It's things that you have to focus on and think about and appreciate and prove. People can be very reliable sometimes, but if the other person who is relying upon them doesn't take the time to figure out and realize how much they have been able to rely upon that person and how they've come through in so many different cases, so all that reliability almost counts for nothing. It's not being appreciated. If a person were to sit down and really take the time to understand God and what we know about him and what he's done for us, and just go over Jewish history, detail after detail, and take the time to do that, then bitachon and emunah would be the most obvious thing in life. It would be like the thing we have to do. The same way, for example, that people today, run to get a degree. It's so obvious you have to get a degree. Why? Because they get the jobs. You can't be a doctor unless you have a degree. You can't be a lawyer. You can't practice law without a degree. An architect has to have a degree. right? So clearly, if you want to get ahead in life, yes, you can make it on your own, and lots of people have, and there's a lot of self-made millionaires, but there's more people who are not self-made millionaires than there are those who are self-made millionaires. But the people who got degrees, okay, there's a lot of people who don't get jobs too, especially when the economy falls off. But colleges would not be open and people would not be running to them if it wasn't for the fact that those who get degrees do tend to get ahead in life a little bit more easily than those who don't. And that's obvious to people. Bituchon Emunah should be even more obvious. It's the most important thing we can have in life. It's such an asset. Aside from the fact it's good for your blood pressure, and for your relationships, and just makes you a much more enjoyable person to be around, and a leader for that matter, because people turn to the non-panicking people for leadership and advice. Aside from all of that, but it's the thrill of life, because just like remember once, so personal episode that happened in my life that taught me a lot. You have to try and learn from everything. And I was walking home from, I think it was shul in the morning, and there was a little child standing by the curb, must have been about 4, 5, 6 years of age. And in an age where parents tell their children, watch out for strangers, don't just go with anybody. And this, as I'm walking close, I realized what this child probably wants, because he's standing there going nowhere. And he looks up at me, and clearly he's looking at me, asking with his eyes, will you cross me across the road? So I did exactly. I've done it several times before, and I did that. But this child actually reached for my hand. He took my hand, and we went across the road together. When I got to this side, he acknowledged, he thanked me for doing for him, and they went on his way. And I don't remember some again, but now many years later, I would even recognize him. As I walked home, like the whole way home, as good as I felt before this thing happened, I just felt so elated after it happened. The whole way home, and I made myself, what's the big deal? Some little kid trusted me to go across the road, but there was something so special about the fact that this child, to whom I was a stranger, complete stranger, felt comfortable enough to rely upon me and know he was safe to cross the road with me. And I thought to myself, wow, if that's the way I feel about this little child, just imagine how Shem feels when we do the same thing. We take his hand, so to speak, and we trust in him. We turn to him to cross us across life, to take us through the jungle, to go through the dangerous neighborhood, so to speak, and come out on the other side. How much nachas and pleasure we must give to him. I once heard a story along the same lines where a young brother was once wanted to play with his older brother, who didn't want the younger brother to play with him, as older brothers often don't. And but the father told the older brother, play with him, just take him along, let him be part of it. What do you care? So the brother had no choice but to agree to it, and they were playing hide and go seek. So came time for the young brother to hide. So at that point in time, the brother and his friends thought, okay, now's a good time to run away. So as he's counting 1, 2, 3, the whole thing goes up to whatever, 10, and he says, ready now, here I come. And he goes looking for everybody, and after about 10, 15 minutes, he realizes that no one was there. They all ran away. They abandoned him. He starts to cry. And, he goes home, as he starts to walk, he starts to cry more and more until he's crying profusely at this point in time. And as he gets close to the house, his father hears him from his den, his study. He recognizes the cry. And he comes out to see what happened to his son. Did something dangerous happen? Is he okay? He comes out and he sees his son crying, but nothing's wrong with the child. So he comes over to his son and kneels over and says, "What's the matter? What's the matter? Why are you crying so much? It's okay. It's okay." So the son explains through his sobbing what his brother had done with his friends and all that, and he was crying. And as he tells the story, his father begins to have tears in his eyes. They well up, and eventually they start to come down. And before he knows it, his father is crying even harder than he was. The son is shocked and surprised. What was it about his story that caused his own father to cry like this? He says, "Abba, I know what happened to me and why I'm crying, but why are you crying like this?" He says, "Until now, I didn't understand. I didn't realize until you came home crying like this. If you, a little boy who's playing with his brother and his brother's friends, wanted to be found and cared about and connected to, and they abandoned you, instead pretended you weren't there, and you're crying like this, I just realized how much Hashem must be so sad and broken, kivyochol, so to speak, because we don't go looking for him. We don't pursue him. We assume, he's not there. We can't see him. We're not prophets today. We haven't heard from him. It's been thousands of years. He should just be happy we're living by Torah and doing the mitzvahs, But aside from, we're on our own and doing pretty well by ourselves. The classic story of the guy who has an 8:30 meeting, and he's looking for a parking spot, and he can't find one. He's going up and down the aisles, he can't find a parking spot, and this is his job interview, and he's like getting all panicky, nervous, so he finally prays to God and says, God, would you do me a favor, please help me find a parking spot so I can park my car and be in time for this very important meeting. And just as he finishes his words, someone pulls out right in front of the building. And he says to God, don't worry about it. I've taken care of it. Yeah. That's God. Everything is Hashem. Every last detail of life is Hashem. In a sense, bitachon, on the surface, it seems like the most difficult and counterintuitive thing to do, relying upon something you can't see, relying upon something you can't talk to, you can't touch. At least with another person, I can ask you, can you do this thing? And they can say yes or no. And even if they say yes, I can make a calculation about what they might be able to do and what they can't do, and say to myself, I better have a backup plan. But when it comes to Hashem, we ask him, we say to him, but at the end of the day, it's a big question mark in the minds of many people. It doesn't have to be that way. On the contrary, God has proven himself to us so many times that he's there, alive and well, involved in history. He might be a silent partner, but he's a partner nonetheless. And the problem is not his invisibility. The problem is our lack of effort to uncover that invisibility. And I'll explain to you what this means based upon another medrash. So we know, we look in the Chumash, it's very clear. The Chumash says that when Yosef's brothers came down to Mitzrayim and Yosef revealed himself, they said, Ani Yosef. They reeled backwards without the ability to speak. They couldn't talk. They were all choked up. They were frozen. If ever there was a time to start talking, that was it. Oh, Yosef, it's so good to see you. You should know we changed our mind about you, and we're worried about you. We came down to Mitzrayim looking for you. Please have Rahmanas on us because we came out of love for you. We made a big mistake. We sorry. But they don't talk. Totally frozen. Out of it completely. And Chazal explained why. Because until that time, even though they had come looking for Yosef, it was mostly because of the fact that Yaakov, their father, refused to be consoled. Already 22 years of mourning for his son. It's enough. The family was depressed. How do you go on like that? So we better bring back Yosef anyhow, at least just for Abba. But they thought they were right. They thought that they were, Yosef was still bad for the Jewish people, but we'll have to find a different way to deal with him. Maybe prove to our father he's a problem, Muslim somehow, deal with it like that. But the moment that Yosef said, Ani Yosef as the viceroy of Egypt, he all of a sudden realized that they had been wrong from day one. That his dreams were real, that God was behind him, as David HaMelech wrote, right? Evan Masu HaBoinim Haisa LaRosh Pinah, the cornerstone that the builders rejected, the stone, that's the one that God uses for his cornerstone in the end. Yosef was the man. He was the one that God had chosen. He was the leader. You know what it's like to find out 22 years later that the last 22 years were all based upon a false premise? It was just too much to handle. They couldn't speak. So the Medrash says we learn something very important from this whole story, beyond just Yosef and his brothers. Likewise, on Yom Adin, the day of judgment of a person, God will only have to say, Ani Hashem. Ani Hashem. I am God, but not just Elokim, Yud Kei Vav Kei. We finish off Yom Kippur, Hashem Hu Elokim. Yud Kei Vav Kei, Elokim. Elokim works b'derech meit, Teva through nature. Hashem is revealed, miracles, etc. It's all one God. That's what we say in Yom Kippur. We shouldn't forget it for the rest of the year. And that way we'll avoid doing sins. And here's Hashem. So how is that the judgment? So my Rosh Hashiva Tzitzel Rav Noach Weinberg once was explaining this medrash, and he said that what was supposed to have happened was that instead of Yosef having to reveal himself, the brothers should have figured out for themselves. This is what Yaakov says. This is what Yehuda says to Yaakov Avinu when he goes back home with the food after the whole story, the backpacks, the money, the whole thing. He goes home, and Yaakov says eventually, "Why did you tell him you have another brother, Binyamin? Why could you just keep it to yourself?" Now he's asking to see him too, and risk that the only other child from my wife Rachel. So Yehuda says, because the man knew everything. He knew even the wood that our cradles, our cribs, whatever they were made from. That's how much he knew. How? Why? Who would care? Who else could know a thing like that? Yosef is giving them hints the whole way. The whole story is to make them think something bizarre is happening. So they'll start questioning everything. Even the word meraglim, spies. He accuses them of being spies. Stands for Mi'imi, Rochel Genavtem, the Midyanim Yishmanim Mechartem. It's a Roshi Tevus, an acronym. Each of the letters stand for different words. You stole me from my mother, and you sold me to Midianites, who stole me to Yishmaelim. In the end, he's trying to get them to figure out that's him for a very specific reason. He's doing this. So what was supposed to happen? Remember, Rosh Hashanah said they were supposed to go, Ata Yosef. Before he could say Ani Yosef, they were supposed to say Ata Yosef. We don't know how, and it's incredibly bizarre. And we thought you were a nobody and a no good, and we sold you and all of that. But the only person who could be responsible, as crazy and wild and outside the box as this is, the only logical explanation at this point is that you got to be Yosef, even though you're viceroy of Egypt. Now, how that happened, we'd like to know. But that's the only thing we could say. And then Yosef would have said, you're right, and that would have been the redemption right there. That's my Rosh Hashivas, the Var Torah, on that particular pshat, because that would have been the tikkun for the Shvatim, and that would have been enough for history to fix up everything. But they didn't do that. He was forced to say Ani Yosef. So if you extrapolate that idea to what the Medrash says about the final day of judgment, so obviously the same thing is true as well. That rather than Hashem saying Ani Hashem is going to be that the guy who spoke to you from the post office, that was me. The guy in the bank over there, that was me. That rabbi who spoke to you and that person over there, and she did this, and I'll take you through your whole life where you thought you were talking to strangers and people, and you believed in the power of bad people, and you're impressed by the efforts of other. Everywhere you look, you get distracted and didn't see the hand of Hashem in all of it. That's Hani Hashem. He's going to reveal himself and show you how everywhere in your life he was there the entire time. So what's supposed to happen instead? Well, let's learn from the Medrash. Let's learn from the story of Yosef and his brothers. A tzaddik, somebody who takes the time to unearth and reveal the hand of God in every aspect of their life and be trained. Train yourself to approach the day like that. I get up in the morning, right? Hashem, this soul came back to me from you. I'm half asleep, but I know it's from you. I'm only awake right now because you did that. And whatever happens in the course of my day, it's from you. And I'm not going to be distracted by this person, that thing, and that piece of news, and that lie, and that thing, and all these things that look like it's completely ungodly. I'm going to try so hard not to be distracted and realize it's always you, and all you do is for the good. That's the other claw in this whole story. Person does that, when they get to Shemaim and Yonadin, they're able to say, Atah Hashem, I saw you the whole way. But better than that, even until they get there, it's better than that, but certainly great, and that is that a person now, in the here and now, will have bitachon. They'll see Hashem in every aspect of their lives. It takes work. And I suggest to everybody, you take time every day to work on this thing. There are different books, English, Hebrews, I mentioned In Search of Trust, it's one of them, but there's many other books that speak about the topic. Reb Dessler in Michtav Eliyahu, search for truth. You can find all kinds. Strive for truth. Strive for truth. There's all kinds of books discussed. Put a whole book of your own together. Put the pieces together. At the Shabbos table, every Devar Torah should come back to this idea bitachon emunah. It's got to be such an integral part of your life. When an athlete trains at the Olympics, his whole life is taken over by his training program, the way he eats, the way he sleeps, what he does, what he doesn't do. It's all one thing because he knows it's a mentality. Kol v'chomer, when it comes to bitachon emunah, it has to become your everyday, all day long, ongoing mentality. That's how you develop it. And once you get to that level of expertise, it becomes the most natural and easy thing to do, and it will save your life. So, thanks for listening.
Okay, thank you so much for that. That was a very, very nice share. We have a few comments, which if you have a few minutes to respond to, we would appreciate it. The first comment, there's actually a few comments from the same person here, William Blesh from Facebook. He says, yeah, but how many examples do we have of those who have trusted in God and still died, were still executed, still had bad things happen to them? Trust and obedience then is not a guarantee that we get what we want or that we get what we need. Look at Job.
Yeah, excellent question, and we'll deal with that next week with Russia. If you get my book, In Search of Trust, in the meantime, you can even get it in the Kindle version. You can read it for yourself in the meantime. The Leshem explains it. As I mentioned, it's a few pages away because he has the exact same question. So we see that as well.
And a follow-up to that. This is a follow-up to that. No, come on. Every last detail of the life of Hashem. The worm is Hashem. Cancer is Hashem. COVID is that Hashem. That sounds just pantheistic.
No. I'm sorry. You have to learn the issues. It may sound that way only because you're missing the important details in faith. That is a fundamental of Judaism. Just look at the 13 principles of faith. Nothing can exist or happen if it's not a function of divine providence. That's a fundamental of Torah Judaism. The moment you start changing that and ignoring that, you basically make life random. And it all goes out the window. This is what we believe. This is how we live. It's all from Hashem. The Gemara says specifically. There's no Kabbalah. The Leshem talks about it. It may look like it's not from Hashem because he makes it look very general. What we call Hashgacha Klal. It's a general Hashgacha Pratis. Pantheistic. That means you believe in multiple gods. It's in the contrary. That would sound pantheistic. This sounds monotheistic, meaning that God is behind everything. Is what Shema Yisrael. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. What does that mean? It means that everything is one. It's all Hashem. God is behind it all. Hashem Elokeinu Yom Kippur. It means God's behind every last detail of it, even the little microbe, and what it does exactly when it does it. It's all the wrath of Hashem. The moment Hashem stops thinking about it, it disappears. Fundamental.
And this is the last one I'm going to put up for him, but he writes, if everything is all from God, then there is no reason to stand up and fight against wickedness. It's from Hashem. Esther and Mordechai should have allowed Haman to do what he wanted to do. It's all Hashem. We should have waltzed into Auschwitz and kissed the Nazis' boots for killing us. It's all Hashem.
I don't understand your train of think, your train of thought. I mean, that's like saying because your college professors give you a test, there's no sense taking it. Because my employer, gives me demands, there's no sense performing them. Because after all, he's the one giving. No, God sends this stuff to us. First of all, if it wasn't for the fact that we ourselves become desensitized to things, we wouldn't even have half these tests because we'd be already doing the right thing. But Hashem does all of this and sets it up specifically to test us, specifically to draw out of us. Look at the story of Pinchas and what happened in the Parshas Balak, this whole catastrophe. It gives Pinchas, the Gemara says, the opportunity to shine and become the zealot he always was. God is constantly looking to give us opportunities to excel in life, to become the greatest people we possibly can. He does what he does, the way he does it, to create those opportunities. And to run away from them. There's no need to kiss the boots of Nazis. On the contrary, he did that to train us and to show us how evil can exist if we don't fight against it. So therefore, we start fighting against it and try to avoid it in the future, which we're not doing again. We're letting it happen all over again. So, no, the contrary. The very fact that God does all this is for the sake of us, to get us to do what we have to do to perfect creation, to be a partner with God in creation, and to bring out the best in ourselves.
Okay, Rabbi, I'm sorry I joined you late. My internet was going on and off. But I've heard this shiur before, and I've always been so taken by the fact that when you were discussing about the brothers and how they should have known it was Yosef, just because it was just so out of the box and so bizarre, like no one else could have known all those details. And I think, and I may be wrong, but I think I learned from you also that when it comes to Mashiach coming, the similar thing will happen. That people, all the signs will be there, and he will say, "Ani Mashiach," and people will say, "Oh my gosh, you're right. Yeah, who else could you be? You can't be anyone else." But just in that light, I'd like to know what you think of the people, and this is tied very closely to an Aliyah program, because the Geula Aliyah kind of go hand in hand so many times in so many discussions. So the people in Chutz La'aretz that are sitting there now, I have so many friends who are saying, we have to strengthen ourselves in America now more than ever. And we have to get Israel to even help us. And we've never been a better community. And this is bringing us together, all this violence and all these protests. And I want to say, what's going to happen to them? Are they going to have all the signs and they're not going to see it? Or will something else wake them up? You can't answer all these questions, but what is your impression about this?
Well, I just draw from history, I just go back and see what happened. For example, Germany in the early 1930s was very similar situation was going on right now. As I mentioned before in the past, the biggest problem we have is that we were not trained for this. The people who should have educated us in Jewish history, we first got to America, for example, at least those people who believe in God and Hashgacha Pratis and things like that, and Jewish history, as a rabbi standing on the pulpit talking to your congregation, someone should say, listen, if we just look at Jewish history, forget about the religious aspect about it and the prophets, but just looking at Jewish history, if it's any measuring stick of how we should behave in Galus, let's take a look. We see in Spain, we prospered fantastically. We thought for a long time it was all taken away from us. We had in Europe, not as prosperous, but nonetheless, you could survive, and then it was all taken away from us. And go back before that, but the Romans, all through Jewish history, the diaspora, we came in, we built up, we did fine, and then everything fell apart at the end, like over and over, not just in a mass level, but also in small communities too. It's happened constantly over the course of history. So a rabbi should have said to us, our teachers in yeshiva should have said to us, look, we're here, make the best of it. This is what Yeshaya and Yechezkel told the Jewish people going to Babel. We're here for the time being. We need to get back, Eretz Yisrael. In the meantime, go raise your families, go build up your houses, your homes, whatever. But know that we're not here forever. And we should have been told that. We should have been told that, listen, we have to live with the reality, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. You want to build houses, you want to invest, but always do it with seichel, with this idea that at some point in time, maybe before we even recognize it, it could all go south on us. We should have been told that. It should have been inculcated into our educational programs from day, because that's Jewish history, and that's what the Torah says in Hazinu, right? Lamed Beis Pasuk Zayin. You have to look at Jewish history and learn it. They didn't do that. It wasn't taught to us, and as a result of that, we grew up without that thinking, and that's very late. I mean, what can I tell you? It's very late. I don't know what the future holds, but if history is any indication, it's going the same way, and people are grasping and grabbing at whatever they can right now to try to cope with the situation, but they lack the tools, because what they're really supposed to be focusing on is the final redemption, and that we have to get back to Israel at some point in time. If we can't do it physically right now, at least we have to do it mentally and emotionally and yearn for that. I mean, just the blessings we say in Shemona Esrei alone, how we're supposed to be yearning for redemption. Like you get the brucha, about Goel Yisrael, you have to I wish you would already. Yeah, I'm a successful businessman. My wife is having a blast, in her learning, classes. My kids are all in yeshiva. I've married off my kids, Baruch Hashem, mostly. Everything's worked out fantastic. But the Shekhinah is still in exile. There's no base in Mikdash. It's in pain, the Zohar says. Every day it's in pain. The person says, God, you blessed me. I'm so grateful for all the good, but how can I possibly enjoy myself fully, as the halacha says anyhow? If it wasn't for the fact you're in galus, and that mentality. If we did it on our own now, if that's what the chinuch was now, that was the hadracha now for the Jews of Chutz La'aretz, they might avoid what might be coming up next. But if they start looking for, it's like people write your senator, write your congressman. Okay, once upon a time that worked. Once upon a time that's all God expected from us, but not anymore. Now the solutions are not by somehow, they have to mechazik themselves 100%. They have to stand together, work together, achdus, and all the things they're doing 100%. But there's a bigger picture here that they have to reach for that too, because if they don't, eventually gets to the point, as I mentioned before in the past, there's two sides to kibbutz galius. One is the side where people willingly want to go, and they get up and they leave, or they plan for it. And the other part, for those who don't want to go, is Hashem makes it that they don't want to stay. And that's where we're going right now. That's clearly where life in America is. Oh, you can't see it? You can't relate to it? How can it, in America of all places, how is it possible? America is like the land of, the din of chesed, and we've done so. Yeah, 100%. That's all. But that's in the past now. It's the paradigm has shifted. And if you can't imagine it, that's not God's problem. That's your problem, because you have to think about it. And unfortunately, people are not getting with the program fast enough. So, what can I say?
Okay, we can talk about that another time. Just one more quick comment, if you don't mind, one quick question. I don't know from where this comes, but Batya Maklis says there's many big Rebbeim, I don't know if you've heard of this rabbi, who started saying Avinu Malkeinu. They want people to say Avinu Malkeinu. Are you hearing about this, and do you have something to say about saying it twice a day?
It was the chief rabbi and signed off also by Reb Chaim Kanievsky.
Well, also, the beginning was Rav Sternbuch, I think, was who actually said it back at the beginning of the coronavirus. 100%. Are you kidding? For sure. It is. Listen, Rabbi Kiva, ended the drought with those words. They are powerful. But if you're going to say it, don't run through it. It has to have heart. You have to say it with sincerity. Avinu Malkeinu. Before you sit down, before you even say it, figure what that means. What does Avinu Malkeinu actually mean to you? Make it real. So when you say those words, because in tefillah, it's kavana that sends it to Shemayim. If it's only done automatically and physically by rote, as if it's just an act they have to do, it's like a little rocket that goes and falls back down again. If you want your tefillah to get to Shemayim, the booster rocket is intention, kavana, heart, sincerity. So that's what God's drawing out of us. All that's going, He's making us more sincere Jews. And if we're not going to do that on our own, He'll keep putting the pressure on until we finally do it. And we don't want that. We don't want that.
Thank you very much. Okay. Gosh,
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining this broadcast. The next broadcast, I'm not sure what's going to be with the next broadcast because it's going to be right after Tisha B'Av, but we'll have to see next week what we're going to be doing. Hopefully, we will be celebrating this Tisha B'Av. I wish everybody a good Shabbos, Shabbat Chazon, and I look forward to seeing everybody soon here in Eretz Yisrael.
Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.